Hi, I'm Elizabeth Toon, and I am here from Chisholm, and I also teach on the History of Science, Technology, and Medicine program and the Medical Humanities pathway. I do a little bit of teaching, but these days I'm primarily teaching on the Science Communication Masters. And you're here, some of you are here to hear more about that master's program. It's run by Professor David Kirby, who fortunately, is not here today. Unfortunately, because it'd be good to have him here. Fortunately, because he's off in Germany doing a big presentation, so he couldn't be here. And basically what I want to tell you about is about our program that is 1 year for full-time students, 2 years for part-time students. And this set of pictures gives you a little bit of a sense of the array of things that comprise science communication. And they're easier to see now. Thank you, James. We might think in particular of things like science news, reporting in The Guardian, reporting in The Times, reporting even in the Daily Mail, reporting on the BBC, discussions of scientific discoveries and what they mean for the public, for everyday life. But of course, science communication is far broader and far more integrated into a large number of educational, entertainment, and cultural activities in our society. So for instance, many of you will be familiar with the fact that YouTube, which we may think of as being mostly watching people play video games or watching cute videos of cats playing the piano, YouTube is also a major arena for science education and communication these days. That's where an awful lot of science communication takes place. In a little more than a decade, it has expanded widely to offer ways of interacting between science, scientists, and all sorts of different audiences to change what people think, what they feel, what they do with regard to scientific, health, medical, technological knowledge. Likewise, this is David, our program director. You can't see very well in this, but he's sitting in a chair that says Big Bang Theory. And that's because David is a scholar who examines how science has been produced as part of entertainment programs. We all know that there are films like Deep Impact, right? Films that feature a scientific sort of MacGuffin as their main theme. This thing is going to happen. We need to either tunnel to the middle of an asteroid or we need to save the world from the ravages of 2012. Oh, whoops, that didn't happen. We know that science is kind of a plot device there. And we expect that very often this is silly science. You'll see a lot of reviews of these films that say there's no way that's going to happen. But it's interesting to see how fictional films represent the scientific process and how it is that scientists can even play a role in shaping what fictional films look like. And that's part of what David's work has been to look at the role that science advisors play in shaping what you see on screen, whether that be in Jurassic Park or Deep Impact. Likewise, we know, especially because here in the UK is the home of nature documentary in many ways, that is a particularly important kind of science communication, which is much beloved by UK culture, David Attenborough and the like. But it's another way of introducing people who may not actually practice science to an understanding of the natural world. But of course, the way documentaries are made, the way they are pitched, has a very particular impact on viewers in shaping their relationship or what they think about the natural world. And let us not forget protest. Science communication is not solely about scientists or health professionals or medical professionals speaking to public audiences and trying to get them to think pleasantly about science. Communication is a two-way, it's a process that involves all sorts of relationships and interactions. And so part of what a science communication degree does is it tries to understand what everyday people think, feel, and do with regard to science broadly defined, which often includes the ways that it has an impact
on their everyday lives, whether that be in the form of genetic engineering, questions about the uses of CRISPR, which some of you with a biological background will be familiar with, or questions about how policies should be shaped that affect everyday people that rely on scientific technical expertise. So our program takes very seriously this sort of very big spread of what's included in science communication, everything from different kinds of media to different kinds of audience, to policy as well as practice, to theory as well as critique. And that's another aspect of our program that stands out against some others, which is we feel it's really important for students to not just get practical experience doing science communication, although you will get practical experience. We think it's important that you have a broader theoretical understanding of the activity and a theoretical understanding that challenges some of the easy assumptions we make about how science communication should work. So we expect you to acquire that theoretical and critical perspective, as well as learning how to do it. So let's move on. Another way you can tell what's included in science communication is by, well, what is it that people who get a degree in science communication end up doing? And the answer is all sorts of things. Some of our former master's students were a relatively new program, just a couple of years old. Some of our former master's students have gone on to PhD study. And in particular, they're doing PhDs that do a deeper and more thorough, original research-based investigation of a science communication phenomenon, whether that be the way polar science is communicated to the public, or how it is that museum redesign reflects political, cultural, and new intellectual senses of what museums should be doing. Those are kind of advanced degrees, but far more of our students go on to very active, very practically oriented careers fairly soon after finishing their degree. In fact, I ran into one of our students from last year this morning who's just gotten shortlisted for a job, and it's less than a month after she turned in her master's thesis because she had an extension. And she's very excited about it. It's a medical writing job in Altrincham. And she, like many of our students, is going into medical writing and health communications writing of different types. But that's not the only outlet for science communication degrees. We have people who've gone on to do policy work or engagement work for professional societies or for corporate organizations or science adjacent organizations. We have several people who've gotten involved in television, film, and audio and radio production, often as assistants who are moving up in their career. Last year, one of our students was actually, he ran off to Sicily to do filming in the middle of the semester, which is an interesting way to get your job started before your degree has even ceased. But he's been very active in doing freelancing and also some contract work around natural history film production. Others have been involved in working with museums because, of course, museums are a major outlet for engaging with different kinds of publics and representing what science, medicine, and technology do in our society. Some people have been on the more curatorial side, others have been more on the communications side. So that's kind of a sense of the various kinds of directions that people go. And the other thing that we're very proud of is that we have had a fairly high placement rate. So right now, it's hard to say exactly, but I think about 80% of the people who finish their theses in January are already in full-time employment related to their degree. So it's not bad. And the others are well on their way there. So what does the program in science communication look like in terms of the way that it's structured? Well, in some ways it's analogous to the programs that James and Karsten described earlier, the HSTM Masters and the Medical Humanities program. But we have a couple of key differences. Our overall structure is that in the first semester, You start by taking our main core course, Introduction to Science Communication, which involves lectures and discussions, seminar education. And there we cover the theoretical and critical aspects of science communication, as well as several different topics. Everything from how has digital and social media changed the way that people engage with scientists, scientific institutions, and science knowledge. Yesterday, we had a long discussion of risk communication. How are health and environmental risks communicated to the public? How do different statistical and visual representations shape how people understand risk? And how should we reshape our statistical and visual representations to do that better, or do that differently at least? So those are the kinds of, we do a broad survey of all of those topics across the course of the autumn semester. If you're a full-time student, you will also take these 2 courses, each of which is 5 to 6 weeks. Communicating Ideas happens in the first half of the semester, and Contemporary Issues and STM happens in the second half. Communicating Ideas, some of you, I apologize, those who've already been here, it is a broad course that includes also students from the STM pathway and the medical humanities pathway, and we go over some general academic skills in terms of writing, in terms of presentation, study strategies, how to master the amount of reading and research that you'll be faced with. Then in the second half of the semester, you go on to Contemporary Issues and STM, and that overlaps with the course that the medical humanities and HSTM students take in the history of science, technology, and medicine. But what you do is essentially you take the second half of that course, because it's very important in science communication to understand recent history of STM. So it allows you to, hi, come on in. It allows you to explore things like the history of eugenics, which you need to understand, for instance, if you're ever going to be writing about contemporary genetics, right? So these 2 shorter courses add up to half of your credits for the autumn, and there's the longer course in the Introduction to Science Communication. In semester 2, the idea is that you take any 2 of 4 options modules. And these 4 options modules are more precisely focused on different arenas of science and health communication and give you a more focused introduction to each. The other aspect I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail in a minute, but you do that in the spring semester. You also work on your science communication research project. And no matter how practically oriented you want to be after you finish the degree, it's important for you to get experience researching and understanding some of the academic and practice-based literature around how science communication works, and developing skills in evaluating evidence about effectiveness, understanding audiences better, all of that sort of thing. And I'll give you some examples in a minute of the kinds of research projects people have done. And finally, over the summer, hi, come on in. Over the summer, we have a mentored project. And this is sort of like a placement in that it's very practically oriented, but it's not exactly a placement. What you do is if you already have a strong connection, you're welcome to use that. But if you do not have a strong connection, we will set you up with a likely group that matches your interests, either in terms of the kinds of practice that you want to be doing or the field that you're interested in. And then as part of that mentored project, what you will do is you will do a independently conducted but professionally supervised science communication or health communication intervention. So I'll give you some examples of the kinds of things that those are. Some people have done them in London or in Newcastle. You don't necessarily have to do it here in Manchester, although many students do. So it's a little more free form, and you do that over the summer and then turn that in at the end of the summer to complete your degree. So that's what a full-time program looks like. And as I mentioned in the earlier session, we try very hard to keep classes as focused on 2 or 2.5 days a week as we can. throughout both semesters so that even if you're taking the course full-time, it will be easy for you to organize employment on the side, because James will talk about fees and funding shortly, but we know that many people have to maintain at least a part-time job while they're doing the program, even if they're doing it full-time. If you are interested in doing the program part-time, well, it's pretty much the same, except split over 2 years. You start out by doing the one course on Intro to Science Communication. In the spring, you choose one of our 4 options modules that's practically oriented, and then you go on to write your research project over the summer. Then the next year, you take these 2 shorter courses, each of which runs for half semester. You take another options module, and then you do your mentored project in the final year. So essentially the same program spread out over 2 years. And this logical progression makes sense for part-time students. We have a number of students who are taking the program part-time, actually, who are already employed in roles that are related to writing or communication or administration or arts work. So they're already working in those jobs, but they're also doing the program part-time. So they come from all different directions. Now the options modules in the spring are really interesting. They originated as day courses, where what would happen was you would meet 6 times over the course of the semester and have a full day course on a particular subject that brings in experts from the outside to help do some of the teaching, to talk about their experience in science communication, and give some ideas about the kinds of everyday things that you do. Now, some of these have remained day courses, others are switching to be every week and more traditional courses, but still with a lot of input from outside experts. So to give you an example, science, media, and journalism in the past, we've had people who do production for the BBC or people who are independent script writers come in, they talk a bit about their experience of combining education and entertainment, and they talk about their experience working with it in documentary form versus drama form. And then we take a break, and then students are expected to bring in a proposal for a fictional film. And what you do is you get partnered up with people, and then you have to do a pitch for your idea to these professionals from the BBC or from independent production companies, and they give you feedback. And we do that all the way across. In the past, we've had things like editors from BuzzFeed and freelance science writers come in and talk about how they do their jobs and the kinds of expectations and concerns that you would have to do. Health communication is a fairly new one that we've added for starting this year. And what that's going to do is it's going to have people who are involved in various kinds of public health communication activities around Manchester come in and talk about their work, whether they be engaged in sort of arts and health work, or whether they're doing sort of more traditional preventive intervention design or design of materials for health communication. There's also museums and public events, which runs more like a day course. That's run by James, who you met earlier. And there's science, government, and public policy, which brings together several other people from the rest of this unit and from other parts of the university to give you more insight and deeper insight into the ways that discussions about science occur in public policy venues. So those 4 options modules are available. The idea is that you will take 2 of them for credit in the course of your degree, but it's very common for students to sit in on the other 2, not for credit, just to get the experience. And frequently we have students from the other programs come to specific modules. For instance, health communication has a lot that is of interest to medical humanities. Science, government, and public policy has a lot that's of interest to HSTM students. So there's a good mixture of students coming together on this. Okay. Let me talk briefly about the mentored projects and the research projects, and then we'll open up for some questions about the program that you may have. Actually, let's do the research projects first, since that's what you actually do first. There's a wide scope in terms of what people tend to do as their main research project in the spring. The idea is that it is original research. It can be historical, it can be intervention-based, but it can be more sociological in nature, more cultural analysis. But again, the idea is that you do some in-depth original research that also encompasses the professional literature to investigate an idea on your own. So here's some examples of the kinds of projects that people have done. Someone wrote a very good analysis of the ways that zoos, conservation experts work together to try to change public attitudes about animal and species conservation. So that involved some interviews as well as examination of policy. Others, this one is a very different kind of analysis. This student, what she did was she looked at the very gripping posters that were produced in the midst of the AIDS epidemic, the early years of the AIDS epidemic, that were often produced either by the Department of Health trying to shape people's behavior, or by patient and activist groups trying to shape behavior. And so she asked, sort of, what can we say about the kinds of visual communication that are involved in these posters? Another project that was done last year that I really enjoyed, one of our students was interested in the ways that people talk back to science in social media. So what she did was, she looked, you probably heard of the NHS Change for Life program, right? All those little cartoons telling you not to drink too much and to stop eating chips and get off the sofa, right? They're everywhere. They're in bus shelters, they're in late night ads, all of that. Another thing that they do is they run a Facebook page where they give suggestions to people who have subscribed about little interventions they can do to help their kids or help themselves live healthier lives. So that seems kind of obvious. They should be using social media. What the student did for her project was she looked at the kinds of discussions people had in response to these posts. And what she found is that very often, the people who responded to these posts would go on to have incredibly detailed, nuanced discussions of why some interventions don't work, why they were rejecting the advice, how to change it. And the whole time, the Change for Life people just sort of sat back and never responded again. So what seems like a two-way form of communication was embraced as such by the audience, but not by the agency that was claiming to do it. Obviously, that has a lot of practical implications, right? So these are the kinds of projects that people have done. They really stretch all over, all different areas of science, broadly defined, some of them more practically and contemporarily oriented, some of them more historical in nature. Then, whoops, we'll go back. From the late spring into the summer, what you will work on is your mentored project. And as I've said before, what happens with the mentored project is that you have a connection organized with a professional who does some sort of science, technology, medicine, health, communication related activity. And it's not as if you were doing a simple placement. You're not simply an intern who makes copies in the office. The idea is that as a nascent professional, you're going to go in and you're going to do a piece of work for them. And your mentor will give you direction, feedback, and guidance to help you produce a piece of professional work, your first independent piece of professional communication work. So for instance, in the past, we've had people, one student last year wrote scripts for new installations at the Center for Life in Newcastle. So she wrote new scripts for a new installation that they were trying to create materials for their explainers to use. We've had people do interviews with people attending the Manchester Museum to try and understand what they think about the way sustainability issues are represented in the museum. We had someone work with the various genetics and genomics programs here at the university to create a game about genetic disease and inheritance that people could play as a way of learning more about the kinds of potential illnesses that they could have as a result of their genetic heritage. It also turns out to be pretty good for medical students who want to study up on various issues in genetics. Another student produced a series of materials that were intended to help parents of autistic children come to the Manchester Museum and make the most of those resources in a way that's appropriate for students who are, for children who need a different kind of exposure to that environment. So all of these are very practical. At the end, the idea is that you have a piece of professional work that you can then show to future employers. And you will learn something by reflecting on that experience that will help you go forward in science communication. So that, I think, pretty much covers it. If you have further questions, I haven't printed out the presentation for you, but we're happy to email it to you. We're going to try and save some trees. But what you should do is you should also email the director of the program, David Kirby. You can also email me if you'd like. I'll give you my email address. You can sign up on the sheet that James is circulating. We're happy to send you more information, and we're happy to give you a sense of what goes on in the program and answer your questions and talk to you about your application.